Alright guys, so you're welcome to this walkthrough, right? So today we're going to be hosting a static website using the AWS command line interface on an S3 bucket. So we're going to host the static website on an S3 bucket, and we're going to actually follow a step-by-step process. Now, this is not a declarative way of actually building a cloud infrastructure, right? But it's a way to tell our command line the step-by-step process we need to actually follow to build this infrastructure, right? So it's to actually give you the idea of how to use a declarative way in the future if you decide to use a tool like CloudFormation, in which you can use a JSON file or a YML file to actually provision your infrastructure in a declarative way. But this is just like a step-by-step walkthrough of prompting the AWS CLI, right? And the service that actually allows us to use AWS CLI, right, in AWS is CloudShell, and you can see that we are actually in the CloudShell terminal. So to begin, right, you're going to log into AWS console. You're going to locate CloudShell, and you can use any region of your choice. And if you come here, you can see that I am in unit EU North 1, which is the Stockholm region. So the first one to do is to create an S3 bucket, right? And we're going to make sure that our S3 bucket has a unique name globally. So I'll come here and I'll type AWS S3 MB, then I'll create the bucket. So I'll come and call it static websites hosting, then my account ID, right? So this is my account ID, and your account ID, you can just use your own account ID here, right? So that it will be globally unique. So I'll just come here and paste this account ID here. Then I'll put bucket, right? Then I'll click on enter. And you can see we have gotten the results: make bucket static website hosting, my account ID, then bucket. The next thing I want to do is to upload our website content, right, to CloudShell. So we're actually going to zip this content, right? Then we're going to actually check it out in where we have it locally in our computer, and we're going to actually upload it. So I'll come here, I'll click on actions, I'll click on upload file, right? Then I'll go to where I have it in CloudShell. So I'll come down here and locate where I have this file, right? So this is the file, right? So I'm going to actually bring it as a zip folder. So I'll click on it and I'll open it. So it's actually uploading, right? So we're going to be patient for it to actually upload to CloudShell. You can see it has been successful, right? So the next thing we want to do is to check that this folder is in CloudShell, right? So we can use this format, use find name tilde, then the folder name, or we can just use ls. So I'll come here and I'll type ls here, and you can see I have this here, right? So I can actually check the exact location this is located in CloudShell. So I'll say find tilde name, then I can come here and actually copy this, right? Then paste it here, then click on enter. You can see this is the exact location it is in CloudShell, right? You can see it is in CloudShell. So the next thing we want to do, right, is to unzip our uploaded folder, right, using the unzip command, right? So I'll come and say unzip, then I'll paste my uploaded folder, right? Now click on enter, and you can see it has now unzipped the folder that is inside this zipped folder, right? Then the next thing is to check to see the zipped and zipped folder. So I'll say ls, and you can see my zipped folder, and you can now see the unzipped folder, right? The zipped folder is in red and the unzipped folder is in green. Then the next thing we want to do, right, is to upload our website folder to the S3 bucket we have created. So I'll come here, I'll clear this, right? So I'll see, let me just click on ls so I can actually see my unzipped folder name, right? And I'll see AWS S3 sync, then I'll see dot slash. So dot slash means that the folder we want to actually upload to my S3 bucket is in this current folder. It is in the home folder. That's why the dot slash, we're actually using dot slash, right? Then I'll come and say tech dealer, which is the name of the unzipped folder. So I'm using the unzipped folder and not the zipped folder, right? Then I will close this. I can just enclose it like this, or just come here also and enclose it. So anyone you choose will actually work just fine, right? Then I will state my S3 bucket name. So I'll say S3 static websites hosting, then my account ID. Now the reason why I'm using my account ID is just to make these buckets globally unique, right? If you use the same name, it's not going to work for you. So you need to actually make it globally unique by using your own account ID, right? So if I click on enter, I can see I've actually uploaded all the content from this folder to my S3 bucket, right? So let me clear this. So the next thing I want to do, right, is to confirm that our website was actually uploaded to the S3 bucket, right? So I'll say AWS S3 ls S3, then my static website bucket I've created. So static website hosting, then my account ID, bucket, right? So if I click on enter, you can see the content of my website is in my bucket, right? So this is how you confirm that what the folder we actually uploaded to my bucket was actually uploaded, by listing all the contents, which are the objects in this bucket, right? Then the next thing we want to do, right, is to create a bucket policy, right, so that we can actually enable public read access, right, so that the world can actually read what we have in our bucket. So we're going to create a file, right, called, which is a JSON file called bucket policy.json. So I'll come here, I'm going to use the nano file editor to create this policy. So I'll say nano, and I'll say bucket policy.json, right? Then I'll click on enter. Now it has taken me inside the nano editor. So the next thing I want to do, that inside this editor, we want to paste this JSON script, right? So what I'll do is I'll come here to my system here and locate where I actually have this policy, right? So I have this policy here in this zip folder, and I can open this policy. So this is the policy, right? So what you need to do when you get this policy is to try and actually replace this ARN with your bucket's name, right? So you can see that this exact bucket's name is what I actually have here, right? Which is my bucket, right? So what you will do is that you're going to just remove this bucket name and actually put your own bucket name. So if you actually use static website hosting, your own account ID and bucket, then you can just remove your own account ID, my account ID here, and input your own account ID. So I'll copy this, you Control C, I'll come here and I'll paste it here. So I'll just click on paste. Now you can see how organized it is. So it needs to be in this format for it to actually work. Now note that it actually started from the top here. Now if I come up here, right, and it started from like this, we are going to actually have issues. So it needs to actually start from the top, right? So that it does not give you problem. So to save this is Control O, enter, and Control X to actually exit it. So you can also check again that we have it, and you can see it is actually saved, right? So I'll just exit it with Control X, and if you come down here, these are the steps for you to actually take. Then the next thing we want to do, right, is to find this bucket policy that we have actually created in CloudShell, right? So I'll come again and say find tilde name, then bucket policy.json. Then I'll click on enter. Now you can see this is where it is located in CloudShell. So I can just copy this with Control C, come to actions, come to download file, and paste it here, right? Then I'll click on download. Now it has actually downloaded here, right? So if I click on this, you can see that it is actually organized the way we actually want it in CloudShell. So I can remove this, right? So the next thing we want to do, right, is to disable block public access. So the reason why I'm disabling block public access is to allow anyone, right, that is with the link of our website to actually have access to this website. So what I'll do is I'll clash this, right, and I'll say AWS S3 API puts public access block, right? Then I'll go to the next line, right? I'll come to the next line, put my indentation, I'll say buckets static. So the bucket is going to specify the name of my bucket. So I'll say static websites hosting. Then my account ID, bucket, right? Then I'll go to the next code block, right? Then this time around, we want to put the public access block configuration. So I'll say public access block configuration. All right, and I'll go to the next code block. Then this time around, I will put the what the configuration I want for this bucket. So I can use a double quote or single quotes. Now notice how I type this. You can see that I am very careful with the casing of what I'm actually using, right? So block public ACLs equals to false. Then ignore public ACLs equals to false. Then block public policy equals to false. Then restricts public buckets equals to false, right? Then I'll enclose this, right? So you need to actually, when you open it, right, you close the quotation so you don't have issues. So if you are good, this should run, right? And you can say I have an error, so I need to actually correct this, right? So where is the problem coming from? The problem is coming from this ignore here. So I'll come here to correct this. And you can see that where it's coming from is coming from this line here. So it's supposed to be comma and not full stop. So I'll just correct it with comma here, right? And I'll click on enter. And you can see now it has actually worked, right? So this is how you actually check for your errors when you actually have one. It's very, very easy for you to actually check this, right? So you don't actually encounter too much errors. So let me clear this. So now I've actually disabled the block public access, right? Then the next one to do is to attach the bucket policy that we created, right, to our bucket. So remember that the bucket policy we created was the bucket policy.json that we created initially, right? So we want to actually attach this policy to our bucket. So I'll come here and I'll say AWS S3 API, right? Then we'll use the put buckets policy, right? Command, right? Then I'll come to the next line and I'll give indentation and we'll say the bucket. So the bucket is always um my static website bucket I've created for this project, right? So I'll say static websites hosting 140023390772 bucket, right? Now go to the next code block and the policy. So this policy here, right, is the bucket policy we want to actually attach to this bucket, right? So this file, right, which is the prefix of the bucket name, it will tell CloudShell that this bucket policy should be identified and located from CloudShell, right? So it means that we are not actually going outside of CloudShell to get this file, right? CloudShell should locate it inside um CloudShell and actually use this file. So that's why the file prefix, we're using the file prefix at the beginning of the bucket policy. So I'll say bucket policy.json, right? Then I'll click on enter. And you can see now there's no error, so I've actually attached this bucket policy to my S3 bucket. Then the next thing I want to do is to make these files publicly accessible, right? So what I'll do is to come and actually make the index.html file publicly accessible so that anybody can actually access it, right? So I'll come and say AWS S3 website. Then I'll actually call my bucket name. So I can just be lazy and come here and copy this section here, right? Then paste it here since this is my bucket, right? Then I'll go to the next code block. Then I'll use the index command. So index document, right, which is the index.html. So if you have another name called maybe my tutorial.html, you need to actually use it, right, so I don't have an error. But the name of my index file is index.html, so I'm going to use index.html. And I'll come to the next code block. Then I'll actually state an error document so that if the index document is not found, at least we should get an error message. So I'll say error document, right? Then we need error.html, right? Then I'll click on enter. I can see that it is good to go. So the last step I want to take is to build the static website URL. So we can actually build an object URL or we can build a bucket URL, but I want to build an object URL, right? So I'll come here and I'll say echo, right? Then I'll follow the exact pattern here to actually build this object URL. So I'll say HTTPS, which is the port for 43, right? Then I'll put // then the name of my bucket, the static website hosting, then my account ID 140023390772 bucket, right? Then I'll put dots s3 dot amazon aws.com slash. Now we want to actually specify the index.html object, so it means I want to actually see this exact object, right? We want to see the content of this object, so I'll say index.html, right? Then I'll click on enter. Now what I'll do next is to copy this, right, URL, Control C, come here and paste it to see if this will work. And you can see my static website Pocket is actually being hosted, right? And it's saying hello hardworking Nigerian youth, and it was designed by Tech Dealer Limited. So this is how you create a static website, right, using the AWS CLI, right? And like we said, right, it is not a declarative way of creating infrastructure. No, right? We're telling CloudShell what to do by telling it the exact processes to actually follow for it to actually build this infrastructure for us.